In the very first week ever, God created light on Sunday, and then he created sky on Monday, land and plants on Tuesday, sun, moon, and stars on Wednesday, fish and birds on Thursday, and then animals and finally people on Friday. What did you do this week? I cut the grass this week, bragged about it for days. Bragged about it for days. But God did not brag. No, sir, he's not that kind of fella. No, he simply paused for a moment, looked down on everything he had created, everything that he had done, everything that he had made, and he thought to himself, I done good. I done good. Now, how does one cap off a week like that? How do you top off all of creation when you've made stars, puppies, sugar lakes, and gentle evening breezes? How do you top a week like that? Well, God rested. He rested. I mean, he must have been exhausted, I would think, and I get it. The other day, we were in the Muskokas, and we spent the whole day in the lake floating and drinking cold drinks and eating chips. And finally, after about 6 hours of this, I looked at my wife and I said, "Hun." She said, "What?" I said, "The kids are going to be hungry soon." She said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm exhausted from all this relaxing." "Me too. Let's go order takeout in town." God was exhausted. I get it. Now, not only did he rest on the seventh day, he also, do you notice, he made the seventh day holy. He turned it into an example for all of us. He set it apart as a day of rest, not only for himself, but for everyone else going forward. A day of rest, a Sabbath. And let's be honest, how many of you truly feel rested in this moment? How many of you truly feel rested in this moment? How many of you truly ever feel rested ever these days? Like if I was to ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being I feel emotionally, spiritually, physically rested, and 1 being I have a hard time getting off the couch to get a glass of water. Okay? By show of fingers, if you're so bold, how rested are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Let's see some hands. I got 7s, I got a 2, I got a 5. Why are you tired, man? I got 3. Okay, I got some 7s, some 5s, I got some 3s. You got a 1 over here. Mister, how are you doing? I'm tired. Okay, I get that. Xander, are you a 1 as well? Yeah, I get it. See what I mean? We're exhausted all the time. And it's the middle of August. Some of you may have even had some vacation. Probably none of you got 10 weeks off like I did. But some of you might actually feel rested in this moment. And you're still a 5 out of 10. And I bet that for a lot of you, it's not necessarily about sleep. It's not always about sleep. I know it isn't for me. I'm that kind of maddening person that as soon as I turn out the light and roll over, I'm snoring within 10 seconds. Like, if you struggle to fall asleep at night, you would hate me, absolutely hate me, especially if you're sleeping beside me, because try falling asleep with that kind of chainsaw snoring beside you. It's not good. But there are other, less tangible burdens that prevent me from finding rest while I'm awake. When certain relationships in my life are unwell, I feel it. When my kids are struggling, I feel it. When the Jays just can't seem to figure out their starting rotation, I feel it. Although I wrote that line earlier in the week, and they since have taken 3 games from the Yankees, so, I have to cut them some slack. Yeah. They want to fire their manager. That's what we've done to them in New York. It's awesome. Anyway. Where was I? What was I talking about? Anyway, as you know, I've just returned from a 10-week intermission, or in non-Presbyterian terminology, we call it a Sabbath or sabbatical. The word sabbatical is rooted in the Hebrew word Shabbath, which means, anyone know? Day of rest. It means day of rest. Pretty simple. So I applied for this 10-week program in the summer of 2021. Way back, over a year ago, when we were still in the thick of COVID and I was just becoming thoroughly overwhelmed. I try not to let it show on Sundays because, well, you didn't need that. I wanted to bring positivity and energy, and I wanted to help you guys through it. But inside, I was just exhausted, but not in the way you might think. Not necessarily because I had too many responsibilities, although that might be the case. But it was because of the emotional and spiritual burden, that sense of responsibility I felt for the church and its people who were just facing so many struggles of their own. You guys were just going through the ringer. And I felt that with you. I walked that journey with you. So, how could I care for myself when I'm so consumed caring for everybody else? Can anyone here relate to that statement? Yeah. I could get a full night's sleep, but I never quite felt refreshed or even close to it. Can anyone else relate to that? I bet you can. And I think for me, it really came to a head on a warm day in 2021 as I stood dressed in black clothing and white collar. And I stood at the graveside of a parishioner who was near my own age, far too young, far too good of a man to die. And it happened so suddenly. It happened while I was on vacation, of all things. And there was this moment as I stood there in the cemetery, dressed in black clothing, wearing the mantle of my office, feeling all of this weight of responsibility, and I pronounced that final benediction at that graveside, and I laid his body to rest in its last and final resting place. And in that moment, my whole person, body, mind, and spirit just said, we can't keep doing this. At least not well. And not forever. I needed a rest. I needed a Sabbath. I mean, if God himself needed a rest, then who am I to think that I don't? Right? What kind of hubris, what kind of arrogance is that? And the same goes for you too, If God needed Sabbath, then why in the world would you think that you don't as well? So, I want to take a little break, and I'm going to invite the band to come back up. We're going to sing a couple songs, and I just want you to reflect upon where you're at right now. I want you to think about the idea of Sabbath, the idea of rest, and ask yourself, am I getting the rest that I need? When I come back in a few minutes, I want to tell you about 3 things, just 3 things that I learned over my 10 weeks of Sabbath rest. And who knows? Maybe you can take something from my experience home with you when you leave today and begin to explore how you too can find your own personal Sabbath. Now, one of the things that I learned during my 10 weeks away is that there are different kinds of rest. Did you know this? There are different kinds of rest. I didn't know this before. I mean, I kind of had an idea, but I didn't know there were so many. In her book, Sacred Rest, Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity, board-certified internist Sandra Dalton Smith talks about 7 types of rest. 7 types of rest. And maybe there's more, but these are the 7 that she talks about. I want to take you through them really briefly so that you can at least be aware of what they are, and you can be aware that there's more than simply getting a good night's sleep when it comes to rest. So the first one is physical, and that's the one that's most obvious, right? It's the chance to use the body in restorative ways to decrease muscle tension, reduce headaches, and promote higher quality sleep. So basically, eating well, I think, is part of that. Exercise, all of that kind of stuff, yoga, stretching, whatever it is, that's part of your rest routine. And that's kind of one of the ones, including sleep, that we think of the most. Next is mental, the ability to quiet cerebral chatter and focus on things that matter. You don't need to raise your hand, but do you ever find yourself thinking a lot of stuff that really isn't important? Or maybe you spend a lot of time thinking about things that could happen, and you almost live in the future, in the what if, and it drives you crazy. Well, that's fatiguing. That's exhausting. That as she says, cerebral chatter can really keep us away from things that matter. Then there's spiritual, the capacity to experience God in all things and recline in the knowledge of the holy. Spiritual rest. And I know a lot of people, a lot of Christians, and myself in certain periods where I didn't have a lot of spiritual rest. Your spirituality was almost something you plowed through. If you're a pastor, maybe it's just about continually caring for people's spiritual health, or continually trying to be inspiring on a Sunday morning or whatever it is. But there needs to be an opportunity for all of us to simply rest in God's presence. Because only when we rest in God's presence are we truly perceiving the Holy Spirit all around us. I think that's a sermon in itself. There's emotional rest, the freedom to authentically express feelings and eliminate people-pleasing behaviors. Now, again, I won't ask for a show of hands, but how many of you would say you just might be a people pleaser? Does it drive you crazy? Does it drive you insane? It does. It does. Oh, only if it bothers me. Yeah. I'm so sorry I'm a people pleaser if it affects you in a negative way. That's right. And whatever else it might be, it doesn't necessarily have to be about being a people pleaser, but just emotionally, how are you doing? Some people wake up emotionally exhausted, and by the end of the day, they're even worse than before. I mean, there's more than just rest when it comes to Sabbath. There's social, the wisdom to recognize relationships that revive from ones that exhaust, and how to limit exposure to toxic people. So in one of the chapters, the book's going to talk about, and I'm telling you about this book so that you can have something tangible if you want to take this further from today. It talks about how there are people in our lives that revive us. We have a great relationship where it's a give and take, where I give and I receive. And there are people in our lives that only take. And as a Christian person, I don't want to reject all those people, right? They need me. But I can't live with those people in all times. Otherwise, it's just too exhausting and it's unhealthy. So it's about having wisdom to recognize and then limit these kinds of relationships, put them in a proper place. They're sensory. And I think this is one we should be well aware of these days. The opportunity to downgrade the endless onslaught of sensory input received from electronics, fragrances, and background noise. And we're always bombarded, all our senses, all the time, right? I mean, for my kids, if I want a moment's rest, what do? Why don't you go watch some TV? The TV's your daddy now. Here, go play on your Switch, Yeah. You love it when I say go play on your Switch. But there's such a thing as too much Switch, isn't there, Sam? That's why we have a limit. That's right. We put a limit right on that thing. But for grown-ups, there's nobody telling us. There's nobody telling us you've had too many screens. Put the phone down. Do you ever find yourself laying in bed at night and you can't sleep, so you reach over and you grab your phone and you start scrolling? Does that help you sleep? Does that quiet the mind? No, but I still do it anyway. So sensory is one area, just to be aware. So I wanted to share with you my rest score. So you can take a quiz online. I'm going to send you a link to it. And I took it. And I took this quiz, you have to understand, for some context, in week 8. Okay? I've been off for 8 weeks. I didn't take it at the beginning, and I wish I had. So you can see my scores here, kind of here. The top scale is 35, and the bottom is 0. So in the first category, physical rest, I had a 23, mental rest, I had a 16, emotional rest, a 20, spiritual rest, 21, social rest, 33, sensory rest, 33, creative rest, 26. How do you interpret these results? Well, here's kind of how it works. That red line there is 15. If you score a 0 or 15, that means you're getting adequate rest in that area. So I have 1. I'm almost in a place where I have adequate rest. I think that's a mental health. Yeah, after 8 weeks off, for some perspective. So I wonder what you guys are facing out there with sometimes no weeks off, right? How exhausted are you? Now, 0 to 15 is good. That's that first red line. Let's throw another red line in here. This line here is 16 to 25. If your score is in this category, as most of mine are, then you're experiencing rest in this area, but you would thrive with more. So this isn't the danger zone, but it just means you could be experiencing a better outcome in these areas. And so, after 8 weeks rest, I'm in a pretty good spot. The next line is 26 to 35. If you're finding you're scoring in this area, you're feeling the effects of your lack of rest, and you need a change. So I still have 2 areas here that I need to actively work on. So one of the key things is to identify what you're doing well and where you're really struggling. And then start to put a plan together to find more rest in those areas. And that takes a little bit of work, which kind of brings me to my second point. You see, I have some work to do, but I think if I had taken this quiz on week 1, a lot of my numbers would have been a whole lot higher. But the value of understanding the types of rest is not just in being able to have proof to say, look, I'm tired, and this is why, and this is the area I'm tired in. But the value is in recognizing it so that you can do something about it. Which leads me to the second thing I learned. Rest requires awareness and intentionality. Now, how many of you have ever had kids? By showing of hands, ever had kids? Okay, 2 or 3 of you have had kids. Okay, or 4. Good. Now, did you let them set their own bedtime? Anyone? Put up your hand if you let them set their own bedtime. No, this is a good way of determining the crazy people in your congregation. You would never let your kids set their own bedtime. Maybe it's a special long weekend Friday night. You let them stay up late till 11 o'clock or whatever. But you know. I have a 6-year-old at home. I have a 12-year-old. I know if I don't maintain their bedtime in the morning, they're going to turn into little goblin monsters. Right, Nancy? Yeah. And so it's in their best interest, and particularly mine, that they go to bed at a certain time. Right? It's very important that happens. We tell them when to sleep. We tell them when to get up. When they're really little, we tell them when to take a nap. Why do we do that? Because they need it. Well, as adults, there's nobody telling us that we need rest. There's no one saying you're giving away way too much of yourself right now to other people, and you need to withdraw a little bit, get a little bit more quiet, and center your own self. There's nobody saying you need to put the phone down and go to bed at 9 o'clock because you get up at 5 in the morning to go to work. There's nobody saying that to you. So you need, and I need, to be intentional about it. So if you're feeling fatigue in certain areas, you need to set goals and boundaries in place to work towards a Sabbath rest. It won't happen on its own. And I think that that's why God has set aside the seventh day as a day of holy rest. Because if he didn't, we would be busy all the time. All the time, we'd be busy. And if we're honest, it really used to be a whole lot easier to carve out a single day for rest and relaxation back in the day, wasn't it? Back before, some of you don't even remember this time, back before everything was open on Sundays. In fact, it was a whole lot easier to do church too because we were the only game in town. So if you were bored, you came to church. And I'd be just fine with that. Just fine with that. But these days, there's always something vying for your attention every single day of the week. In fact, every single minute of every single hour of every single day of the week. Do you even remember TV? Like, when I was a kid, I had to get up and search the channel for cartoons. And by noon it was over. It was all Wheel of Fortune after that, right? But now my kids have access to so many streaming platforms that they can be bombarded with anime and the Wiggles as much as they want, as much as they could possibly desire. But these days, it's so tough to put those boundaries in place. So now that rest is not forced upon us, we need to be more intentional, have a plan. Maybe you need to have a family meeting and talk about ways that you can decrease the constant onslaught of overstuffed schedules and continuous communication. Like maybe you say, all right, you know what? We're going to put our phones away at 7 o'clock every night this week and see who survives the week. You know, to get rid of some of that sensory fatigue. We're going to try to turn down the music a little bit, maybe turn it off while we're driving, get a little bit of quiet and solitude. You know, we're not going to go visit your mother-in-law this week. I need a little bit of social rest. You know, whatever it might be. Less media, more quiet. Maybe you consider as a family reading sacred rest together or simplify family outings. Sometimes I know as parents we make these family outings to be a big production when some of my favorite times, I think my kids' times, is when we simply would drive to Awenda Park and then walk around the lake for an hour and a half and just enjoy God's creation. It doesn't always have to be such a production. Now for me, my 10-week Sabbath meant, this is one of the boundaries I knew and I was told I had to put in place, was not contacting people from the church, not reading email, snoozing Facebook pages related to ministry for 10 full weeks. And I have to tell you, it wasn't easy. It was actually really hard. And it lasted 4 hours. Early morning, on the very first day, I got a call from head office about another congregation. And I normally just want to say, you know what, I'll jump in, I'll help you, I'll boot up my computer, I'll do what I need to do. But I explained to her instead that I was on intermission and that someone else was going to have to deal with the issue. And you know what? It felt great. It just felt great to say, this is not my responsibility in this moment. It will be 10 weeks from now, but right now it's not. And it felt great. Not for her, of course. She sounded kind of ticked off, actually. But, you know, for me at least, it was pretty freeing to have permission to say, I can't help you. But the truth is we can't always be helping everyone all the time. This is a recipe for burnout. So I was a good boy. I did what I was supposed to do. I kept that intentional boundary for the most part. And believe me, I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask about so-and-so's health or proceedings with the building or how Sundays were being received. In fact, I found that for the first 3 weeks, all I did was think about this ministry. It's all I did. Every hour, I thought about Knox, I thought about you, and I thought about all of this. It took 3 weeks before I could sort of quiet my mind. And I think that's one of the reasons why the denomination gifts us with this opportunity to take an intermission. I would never have known just how much the church consumed my thought life if I hadn't fully disengaged. And I wouldn't have known just how much you meant to me if I hadn't fully disengaged. It was something that I had to do. Only then was I in a place to allow God to speak to me about me, and then later to speak to me about ministry from a different perspective. You see, God knows what he's doing. Do you think that he wasted that seventh day doing nothing? Was that a waste of his time? With all of his power and everything that he was capable of doing, to do nothing, it might seem to us like it was a waste of time. But this is the third thing that I learned through 10 weeks of rest, that sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing. And it's true. The other day I told my wife I was going to do nothing all day. Hun, I'm not going to do anything all day. And she said, but you did nothing yesterday. And I said, I know. I haven't finished it yet. I went into the chiropractor this week, and I was having some issues with my back, that bulging disc thing. And he saw me, he looked me up and down, and he went, wow. I said, what? What's wrong with me? He said, nothing. You look amazing. He said, you look incredible. You look so well rested. And I thought, well, thank you. That's great. And I explained I had this intermission. He said, well, I'm kind of jealous, but I'm really glad that you had this opportunity. It's really awesome the church would do that. And then I left, and then I came back 3 days later for the second appointment. He said, I just can't get over how good you look. Does your wife tell you all the time how good you look? And I said, you haven't met my wife, have you? No, she has. But I was caught off guard. He could tell the difference that rest makes just by looking at me. And honestly, by the 10th week of doing nothing, I was just itching to roll up my sleeves and get back to something. Well, before intermission, I had to struggle to be creative. I mean, I felt like I was putting some pretty good sermons out there, but it was like moving through water. It wasn't easy. It was such a hard thing to do. But in my 10th week, I had dozens of sermon ideas. I had so many ideas. Before intermission, I was burnt out. I was emotionally exhausted. But by the 10th week, I was just eager to come back and get to see what was going on and to care for people once again. Because sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing. And I want you to remember that if you happen to have any more vacation left this summer, to take advantage of it, to enjoy it. Give yourself permission to be like God, right? And do nothing for a period. Now, I realize that not all of us have the benefit of 10 weeks off, and I am so privileged for this gift. So humbled and so thankful for this gift of time. I really am. And it's going to be a long time before I can do this again, so I need to build Sabbath into my life. I need to take the lessons from this period and build it into my life so that I get rest on a more sustainable basis. I need to continually assess my rest levels, be intentional about boundaries, make sure that I remember that doing nothing is sometimes the best thing I can do and the best thing you can do as well. Now, I'm going to email it a link to the survey that I took. So if you aren't on my email list, what are you waiting for? And you just might want to begin with this same assessment that I took. And I'm also going to link in the email to the book, Sacred Rest, because that will help you put together a plan for building Sabbath rest into your own life. And if you'd ever like to sit down with me for an hour and talk about ways that you can build more rest into your life, I would be absolutely thrilled to do that with you. One of the things that I'd like to do more of is more spiritual care, one-on-one or in small groups in the coming years. Now, at the end of the day, you can only give what you have. And so if you're burned out and exhausted and overwhelmed, then you don't have much to give to yourself or anyone else. And trust me, God wants more for you than that. That's why he gave us Sabbath, and that's why he made it holy. So let us treat the act of rest with the honor that it deserves.